The Dragon's Voyager. This story is about a great sailor who lived in distant times. His name was Zheng He, a navigator and fleet commander serving China's Ming dynasty. He was born in a humble village in southwestern China, yet his fate led him to one of the greatest naval expeditions in history. Zheng He rose from slavery to become a hero, earning respect through his wit and courage. His ships sailed the Indian Ocean centuries before the Atlantic and Pacific voyages. Hundreds of vessels and thousands of sailors were under his command, acting as envoys of trade, diplomacy, and peace. His voyages did more than explore lands. They united diverse cultures. He built a bridge stretching from China to Africa's coasts, from the Middle East to Southeast Asia. Though little known in history books, his legacy still lies hidden in the ocean's depths. Zheng He was not just a sailor, but an ambassador of peace and understanding. His journeys were a great movement that reshaped world balances of the era. The challenges he faced and the experiences he lived are worth telling. This is his silent voyage, story of listening to the language of seas and winds. Zheng He's life is a symbol of hope, perseverance, and discovery. The sea was his home. His ships were the wings of his dreams. His story is a legend-defying time. On this journey, we will listen to silence and sail toward distant horizons. This is the story of the Dragon's Voyager, a silent yet profound sea epic. Now, hoist the sails, the story begins. The whisper of the horizon, the port of Nanjing, was wrapped in the quiet of morning mist. Only the taut ropes and distant cries of seabirds could be heard. Zheng He stood still at the edge of the dock, his gaze fixed beyond the sea, toward unseen lands. Behind him, dozens of massive ships waited like slumbering beasts stirred by the morning breeze. The sails were drawn tight, the ropes trembled. Every breath on the dock carried the silent tension of a farewell. In Zheng He's hand was the imperial decree, sealed with red wax. This voyage was for peace. The crew worked without speaking, artisans checked the decks, and final offerings were made to the water. Rice had been cast into the sea, incense had been lit. A blessed journey was about to begin. Bao Chuan, Zheng He's flagship, rose more magnificently than all others, stood like a palace at sea. As Zheng He stepped aboard, the crew bowed their heads in respect. He walked silently among them. Inwardly, he took deep breaths to keep the calm within his chest from spilling outward. He touched the brass compass box on deck, his faithful companion for years at sea. In his cabin, he unrolled the maps. Calicut, Aden, Javalal, marked in crimson ink. One corner sat a miniature dragon statue, dedicated to the sea goddess Mazu. He had prayed all night not for profit, but for wisdom. The boy who was once Ma, he now stood at the helm of an imperial fleet. His fate, which began in Yunnan, now stretched to reach the Indian Ocean. The drums began to beat slow, rhythmic, like an ancient call. The ship moved forward, the harbor faded behind them, disappearing into the mist. Without turning back, Zheng He whispered, "Let the wind carry us." And thus, the silent voyage began. The intention of a nation echoed in the heart of one man. Silent waters, as the sky slowly cleared from the east, the shadows of the fleet stretched long across the sea. The ocean was almost perfectly flat. Only the gentle sound of waves breaking beneath the ships could be heard. On the deck of Bao Chuan, Zheng He completed his morning prayer in silence. The sailors had begun their duties with a practiced precision. Each man knew his task by heart. The cooks lit the hearths, reheating the rice left from the previous night. On deck, ropes were coiled again, sails examined and adjusted. Zheng He looked out from the watchtower. Nothing but endless blue lay ahead. The morning sun shimmered on the sea mist, casting a silver glow on the water's surface. Sky and ocean seemed to blend into one. Navigation now depended solely on the stars. Below deck, a student opened celestial charts and questioned his master. Zheng He watched them, paused for a moment, and walked on without intervening. Every port, every voyage brought new students, new cargo, and new questions. In this silence, the echoes of the past rang more clearly. He remembered his mountain home in Yunnan, his mother's voice, and the charms he made as a boy. Much had changed since then, but the language of the sea remained the same. To him, the sea was a teacher, a confidant, and a trial. Each journey was less about discovering the world and more about discovering the self. Zheng He sat in a quiet corner of the deck and murmured a single sentence. The true voyage is within. At that moment, the fleet turned northwestward. The wind pushed gently from behind. As the sun rose, the ships continued forward across the silent waters. The city that came with the wind, a dusty line, appeared on the horizon just as morning broke. The crew silently lifted their heads when they spotted the distant land. They were nearing the port of Calicut. The scent of India rode in with the wind. A mixture of spice, incense, and burnt oil blended with sea salt and clung to the ships. Zheng He smiled as he watched the coast through his scope. These lands were no longer foreign. Calicut was a crossroads of trade and politics. The harbor was crowded. Arab merchant ships, local boats, and foreign flags floated side by side. As they approached, bells rang out, signal flags were raised, and the shore responded. Zheng He ordered his envoys and gift chests to be prepared. Below deck, porcelain vases, mother-of-pearl boxes, and silk scrolls were carefully selected. The goal of this visit was to renew friendship and exchange knowledge. For Zheng He, each port was not just a stop, it was another page turned in a living book. The Sultan of Calicut was one of the rare leaders who had long maintained ties with the Ming Empire. When he stepped ashore, he walked with modest but steady steps, accompanied by his most trusted interpreter. Crowds gathered along the road to the palace, watching him with curious eyes. Whispers passed among the people. The dragon's envoy has arrived. At the palace gates, officials in gold-embroidered robes greeted Zheng He with reverence. During the visit, they discussed the future of the spice route, peace treaties, and religious rites. Zheng He presented the Sultan with a jewel-encrusted inkstone as a gift. That night, under lanterns dancing in the wind, silent but deep friendships were forged in the palace courtyard. Without looking back, the day began with a heavy mist over the harbor. The shores of Calicut vanished into gray. Zheng He awoke to a bell that sounded like the call to prayer, but this time it signaled farewell. His final night at the palace had passed in long silence and deep reflection. The meeting with the Sultan was as meaningful as any written treaty. It was time to return to the sea. The ships waited at the dock, ready. The crew was quiet. No one seemed eager to leave, yet all awaited the command. When Zheng He stepped onto the dock, there was no ceremony, only morning fog and slowly retracted mooring lines. The gilded gifts were secured, the last crates loaded, and a handful of rice was offered to the waters. No one spoke loudly. Farewells were exchanged through glances and gestures. A child in the crowd waved Sang. He returned the wave, his face unreadable. An emptiness grew inside him. With each journey, it felt as if more of him remained behind. On the deck of Bochuan, the compass already pointed north. A new course awaited. The ships began to move slowly. The homes and towers of Calicut were swallowed by mist. The wind felt colder now, and the waves struck with greater weight. Zheng He reorganized his maps, marking new ports for the next phase of the voyage. But his eyes drifted more to the fogged window than to the ink. One of his students approached, holding an old compass gifted by the Sultan. "Does the wind always speak the same language?" the boy asked. "Zheng?" He didn't answer. He simply looked ahead and nodded gently. The silhouette of Calicut had vanished behind him, but its memory continued with the sea. In the heart of the Indian Ocean, as the days passed, the line between sky and sea faded. Blue disappeared into blue. The sun rose, set, and rose again, but the sense of time melted away in the middle of the ocean. Zheng He took morning walks on deck, listening only to the rhythm of the waves. The crew carried out their daily duties with practiced routine, speaking little but working hard. The wind was sometimes a friend, sometimes a foe, one day kissing the sails, the next day tearing them. For 3 consecutive nights, storms struck. Massive waves shook the ships and shifted their cargo. A sailor praying on deck raised his hands to the sky as tears ran down his face. Zheng He stood firm, never taking his eyes off the dark clouds above. When Bochuan's captain reported the stars had vanished, their sense of direction faltered. The compasses spun but pointed nowhere, almost as if the sea itself had surrounded them with intent. Provisions were recalculated. Water evaporated more quickly in the salty air. A few sailors began to fall, their mouths dried, and they collapsed with darkened eyes. Zheng He paused below deck to offer prayer. He believed this silence was a test. One of his students shared a nightmare of a lost fishing boat adrift without a name. That night, Zheng He wrote only one line in his journal. "The wind says nothing, it only watches." On the dawn of the fourth day, a bird appeared in the distance, white, solitary, flying low. It was a sign that land was near. Morale quickly improved, and color returned to the crew's faces. By noon, land emerged through the mist. They were approaching an island not even marked on the maps. Zheng He received this small land as a silent gift from the divine. When they reached shore, he sat beneath a palm tree, placed his hands on his knees, and simply said, "We are here." The island, the ship brushed gently against the shore. As the crew carefully tied the ropes, the wind was softer on the island. Leaves swayed lightly, and bird calls echoed. Yes. Zheng He was the first to step ashore. He closed his eyes as his feet touched the damp sand. This land had no name, but for that moment, it was the most real place on earth. The crew slowly followed. Some sat down, others shouted joyfully toward the sea. A group headed into the forest to search for fresh water. Others spread the damp cargo across wide clearings to air them out. Zheng He sat on a rock under the shade and rested his hands on his knees. A slight smile formed on his face. For the first time in days, he felt at ease. One of his students sat beside him, sketching silently into his notebook. "This place isn't on any map, but maybe we needed to be here," said the boy. Zheng He nodded slightly. "Some stops lie outside the route, but not outside purpose." The island remained calm all day. Everyone slowed down, even time seemed to pass gently. In the afternoon, a freshwater source was found. This small discovery lifted the entire fleet's spirits. Colorful birds emerged from the forest. One landed on Zheng He's shoulder before flying off. At sunset, the crew gathered back on the beach and lit fires. Zheng He sat among them and laughed for the first time. Later that night, stars shone brilliantly across the clear sky. That night, he wrote a single line. To pause is also part of the journey. The island, like a friend that needs no name, had given them peace. New sails, old silences at sunrise. The last campfires on the island were put out. The ashes merged with the sand. Zheng He finished his morning prayer atop the island's highest hill. Below, the ships were ready, ropes slowly untied from anchors. Peace filled the sailors' eyes, though a quiet sadness of parting hovered around them. No one said farewell. The island never spoke, and so silence was its farewell. On Bo Chuan's deck, Zheng He took the compass in hand and turned it north. Before leaving, the students made final drawings in the sand, then erased them all. The ship drifted away from shore. The island shrank, its shape fading behind clouds. The ocean embraced them again. The wind was soft, but steady. As Zheng He walked the deck, he watched the water closely as if seeking a new language. The crew worked more quietly, more harmoniously, as if reborn. The island had taught them something unseen but deeply felt. The students had stopped asking questions. Now, they simply listened more. Zheng He carried the silence like a lesson, each step now more deliberate. One night, he found the North Star among the heavens and smiled. "The path never disappears," he whispered, "but sometimes it hides eyes." He marked a new port on the map. It was unknown, but direction no longer mattered. The goal was no longer just shores, but inner balance. The wind breathed life into the sails again, filling them with quiet purpose. Zheng He closed his eyes and listened. The silence was no longer fear, it was a guide. The whisper of prophecy under the cloak of night. As stars glittered, the ship moved slowly forward. Zheng He stood alone on deck, gazing into unknown waters afar. Suddenly, a faint ring of light appeared on the horizon. It rose slowly through the mist. The crew fell silent in awe. No one could explain what they saw. At that moment, one of the elder sailors murmured an ancient legend. "No return without finding the key of the sea," he said, his voice trembling. Zheng He listened. The words hung in the air, dancing with the wind. The ring of light grew brighter, revealing silhouettes of old ships within. A melody rose from the sea. It was as if a song from centuries past was playing. The ship rocked gently. The waves were no ordinary waves but moved in harmony. Zheng He looked at the compass in his hand. The needle spun wildly. The sailors exchanged fearful glances, but their captain stood firm. In that moment, past and future converged. The sea was revealing its secrets. Like a mermaid's tale, the voice of prophecy whispered. Those who lose their way only find it if they carry light within their hearts. Zheng He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. That night, in a dream, he swam through the ocean depths, guided by ancient captains. Upon waking, he faced the crew and spoke with resolve. The sea is greater than us, but its secret lies within. And thus, with the whisper of prophecy, the silent voyage took on a new dimension. Endless horizons at sunrise, the ship set sail toward the horizon. The sea was calm and deep blue in the morning light. Zheng He stood on deck and took a deep breath. The journey was nearing its end. The crew was filled with new hope after months of silent voyage. The horizon was full of worlds unknown and waiting to be discovered. In Zheng He's mind, all that had happened played like a film reel. The bond he forged with the sea was beyond words. He held meetings with the ship captains. New routes and goals were decided. Balance had been found among storms, silences, and prophecies. Zheng He thanked his companions. His pride was visible on everyone's faces. One of his students quietly gazed at the stars and whispered, "We're only beginning." Zheng He nodded. "Every journey is both a beginning and an end," he said. The ocean had shaped their fate and tested their souls. At sunset, the ship sailed quietly. The horizon was a gateway to infinity. Zheng He closed his eyes and silently wished for hope in the future. The winds sang new songs in the sails, and the waves carried hope. The crew was ready for new adventures. Each had undergone an inner transformation. This voyage had conquered not only lands but hearts. Zheng He murmured softly, "No matter how far the horizon, our hearts are one." And the ships glided silently toward endless horizons. After the silence, as the sea merged with the night, silence wrapped everything around. Zheng He stood alone on deck, gazing at the stars. The stars whispered that the path was far from over, walked a thin line between past and future. Every wave was the start of a new story. The fleet's silence carried thousands of voices within. The home once far away now lived in his heart. The sea had become his greatest teacher. Wisdom born from silence was his strongest weapon. Zheng He took a deep breath, ready to continue his journey. The sails filled again. The wind called him to new adventures. The night moved peacefully in the ocean's embrace. Each ship carried a dream within the silence. This voyage, lost in infinity, was turning into legend. He was now master of sea and stars. Every moment was a memory, every moment a lesson. He closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of silence. A smile appeared on his lips. Silence was no longer fear, but hope. Sailing toward new horizons, echoes of the past guarded him. The voice after silence always called him forward.